Number 9. Chaco Canyon. In the remote desert of northwestern New Mexico, there is a magnificent collection of pre-Columbian ruins known as Chaco Canyon. From 900 to 1150 AD, this site served as an important cultural center for ancestral Puebloans, also known as the Anasazi. Its builders were far ahead of their time, using unique masonry techniques to construct massive multiple-story stone buildings called great houses. These structures contained hundreds of rooms and were completely pre-planned, as opposed to added onto as needed, which was a common practice of the time. It took decades and sometimes even centuries to build these massive constructions, kind of like the cathedrals in Europe, reflecting the level of planning and ingenuity that went into them. They were often oriented based on solar, lunar, and cardinal directions, and were surrounded by earthen mounds and water control features, according to the National Park Service. Experts believe that the great houses functioned as temporary dwellings for people who came to the area for ceremony, commerce, trading, and other events. The construction of new buildings declined noticeably at Chaco Canyon during the 12th and 13th centuries. People began moving away, and the site's cultural influence waned. The reasons for this are not entirely clear, but research suggests that excessive logging for firewood and for construction led to deforestation, which caused erosion, making the land unable to produce crops. A 50-year drought also didn't help, and the people had to leave to find water. Dismembered bodies found in the region, despite evidence of warfare, indicates that the residents of Chaco Canyon may have even become desperate enough to resort to cannibalism. This theory has shaken a lot of people up and is quite controversial. To many, this theory is a slander on their ancestors and is quite shocking, as the ancestral Puebloans were believed to be peaceful people. Professor Christy Turner argues that cannibalism may have been brought from Mexico into Anasazi territory, perhaps by an angry religious cult. This cult may have terrorized and controlled the Anasazi. This is based on the discovery of the remains of 7 people dating back to that time period along the Puerco River, near the Arizona-New Mexico border. The 7 people showed evidence that their bones had been boiled to extract the marrow, and their rib cages were cracked open. Turner says the remains at the Puerco River site are similar to remains of victims of ritual sacrifice in Mexico. Perhaps this terrifying cult that believed in sacrifice came up from Mexico and took over, leading to the collapse of the Anasazi. For other researchers, this is just one strange event, such as a battle or extreme hunger, or a sociopath on the loose, and not a general code of conduct. Have you ever been to Chaco Canyon? What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Number 8. Aileen Moor Lighthouse. Aileen Moor is a small remote island off the Scottish coast. Historically, its only inhabitants were lighthouse keepers. In 1900, the crew of a small ship approached the landing platform at Aileen Moor. They were surprised that none of the lighthouse keepers were waiting there to greet them. The ship's captain, James Harvey, blew the horn and set off a flare to alert the keepers to their presence. Still, nobody came. Joseph Moore, a replacement lighthouse keeper who was scheduled to be dropped off at the island, rowed ashore and climbed the steep cliff that leads to the lighthouse. He was overcome with a sense of foreboding as he approached. Moore found the lighthouse door open and noticed that 2 of 3 oilskin coats were missing. In the kitchen, he found half-eaten food and an overturned chair, and he noticed that the clock had stopped. The keepers themselves had also disappeared, and a search ordered by Captain Harvey failed to find them. Recent entries in the lighthouse's log describe severe winds that were worse than anything one crew member had seen in 20 years. He also wrote that one of the keepers was unusually quiet and another was crying, despite being a veteran mariner. The workers should have been safe inside the lighthouse, which sits on a cliff 150 feet above sea level. Even more strangely, there were no storms reported in the area on the dates the entries were made, although a catastrophic storm battered the island days after the final entry stated that the storm was over and that God is over all. What the writer meant by that statement, nobody knows. An investigative committee concluded that a rogue wave must have washed all 3 men off the landing dock, but this does not explain why nobody stayed inside the lighthouse, a requirement at all times, or why their remains were never found. Number 7. Nabta Playa. Ancient Egypt was preceded by the ancient Nabta Playa civilization. Very few archaeological remains exist to tell us of this early society, with the exception being a site in the Nubian desert. The ruins consist of hundreds of prehistoric earthen mounds called tumuli, large stone slabs, and megalithic structures. The Nabta Playa civilization emerged around 11,000 years ago and built an urban community that was highly advanced for its time. A cluster of sandstone tumuli at the site contained the bones of cattle, goats, and sheep. At the time, the now arid region was actually humid, making the environment much more livable and conducive to farming. One tumulus was larger than the others and contained the 7,400-year-old remains of a young cow, suggesting that the animal was sacrificed. This and other evidence found at the site indicate that a prehistoric cult or religion arose by the 6th millennium BC. The Nabta Playa civilization disappeared around 5,000 years ago when the climate shifted, turning the region into a dry desert. Nobody has been able to prove where they went. One theory claims that the population migrated to the Nile Valley and that their activity paved the way for the powerful Egyptian cities that eventually arose. The construction of a step pyramid at Saqqara within 500 years of the Nabta Playa exodus suggests that the builders had an established cultural foundation before arriving there and developing the area, according to archaeologist J. McKim Malville. What's more, some of the constructions at Nabta Playa focus on the Big Dipper's brightest star, which was also very significant to the Egyptians. While the clues point strongly toward the so-called lost civilization laying the roots for ancient Egypt, this theory remains unproven, and for all intents and purposes, the mystery is still considered unsolved. Number 6. The Lost Colony of Roanoke. In 1587, a group of 115 English settlers hoping to establish lives in the New World arrived on the island of Roanoke, in what is now Dare County, North Carolina. The fate of this colony has become one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. When resources became scarce, their leader, Governor John White, went back to England on a resupply mission, leaving his wife and daughter and granddaughter behind. He was hoping to go back, get supplies, and come straight home. But there was a war going on in Europe, so he wasn't able to go back for 3 years. In that time, something dire must have happened. When he finally returned, the settlement was completely empty. Everyone was gone, including White's entire family. Only one person's remains were found there, along with the word Croatoan carved into a tree. Researchers believe the word Croatoan was referring to what is now Hatteras Island. Perhaps this was supposed to be a clue of where they had gone in case someone came looking for them. There are many theories about what happened to the lost colony. Some believe that the settlers attempted to return to England due to the harsh conditions, but never made it. Perhaps they died from disease or hunger, or were killed by Native Americans or hostile Spaniards, since they were at war. It's also possible that the word Croatoan refers to a local Native American tribe, who perhaps kidnapped the settlers. Or maybe the settlers voluntarily joined the tribe, who knew the land and were likely their last hope for survival. In 2012, researchers found a secret message on a very old map. ArtNet reports that on this map at the British Museum, hidden in invisible ink, were the outlines of 2 forts, one 50 miles west of Roanoke. Whoever made it used invisible ink, presumably to guard information about the colonies from the Spanish. Archaeologists set out to investigate and found shards of English pottery near a Native American village. Later on in 2019, archaeologists found another site also with pottery fragments from several parts of Europe, as well as a slate writing tablet, 16th century gun parts, sword parts, and a clothing clasp. It looks like the colonists of Roanoke split up into various groups and relocated to survive. Some perhaps even married and assimilated with some of the Native American tribes, as there were numerous stories and legends passed down of tribal members with blue eyes and blonde hair, and future generations spoke some Old English words. While there is evidence in several places of what may have happened to the colonists, the governor, John White, never saw his family again. Number 5. Johar Verde. Johar Verde was a small Brazilian town in the jungle that once housed around 600 residents. The story goes that in 1923, some visitors arrived at the site only to find nobody there. Some doors and windows were left open, but the town was pretty much frozen in time, with very little damage, as if everyone had just gotten up and left. Police from a nearby town investigated the scene and found a gun inside the local school. A forensic examination determined that it had been fired as recently as the day before it was discovered. Officers also noticed the words, "There is no salvation," scribbled onto a blackboard. A search party was sent out to look for the missing villagers, but nobody ever found them. Today, it is an unsolved mystery in Brazil, but at the time the story broke, nobody paid much attention. However, based on the political climate at the time, it is possible that the town may have been forced to evacuate by rebel guerrillas, or even worse, may have all been killed. Even today, there is extreme violence happening in the jungles of Brazil, but information is hard to come by. Illegal miners are caught firing on indigenous groups, and illegal loggers are constantly threatening, attacking, and even killing those who stand in their way. So it does not seem that far-fetched that villagers could be made to disappear. This mysterious town seems to have first appeared in a Russian magazine. Some think the story is made up, and that elements of different South American folklore tales may have inadvertently somehow gotten combined into one story. At the same time, there are photographs available online that were supposedly taken at Johar Verde. The town does not exist today, but the Amazon jungle is a big place that regularly sees the dismantling of small villages. But most Reddit commenters, including some from Brazil, said that the tale of Johar Verde is nothing more than a good ghost story. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Number 4. Lake Anikuni Vanishing Village. One night in 1930, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle entered an Inuit village near Lake Anikuni in Nunavut, Canada, feeling weak and tired from the harsh winter weather. He was hoping the town would be a good place to rest before continuing with his trip, but nobody answered his greetings, and he soon realized that the entire population of 2,000 had vanished. LaBelle initially assumed that there had been a mass exodus, but he noticed that food, weapons, and other supplies were left at the site. He even found a partially cooked pot of stew that had grown mold sitting on the stove, as if someone had left it in a hurry and on a moment's notice. There were no signs of a struggle and no footprints left in the snow to indicate what direction the villagers may have fled. Rumor has it that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police found that every grave in the village had been dug up and left empty, with the headstones piled neatly to the side. Nearby, a pack of dead sled dogs lay buried in a pile of snow. Another trapper reportedly told authorities that he recently noticed a bizarre cylindrical object falling from the sky, sparking theories about aliens having something to do with the mass disappearance. The RCMP determined that the villagers went missing roughly 8 weeks before LaBelle discovered their absence, but it was never determined why. But this story is quite strange, considering there is a lack of physical evidence that the village ever existed in the first place, or that Joe LaBelle, who was a real person, even went there. There is no official police documentation of the incident, witness statements about the strange object in the sky, or records of an investigation. Number 3. Achill Island. One of Ireland's most remote villages was established in 1838 on the westernmost tip of Achill Island at Keene Bay. It grew to include 40 households and was known for its serene beauty, according to the writings of travelers who passed through. Interestingly, these records describe the residents as primitive and backwards. Yet locals had no memory of the village, which appears to have been abandoned at some point. Even more strangely, other settlements on the island remained inhabited, begging the question of what could have possibly happened. In an attempt to solve the mystery, a team of researchers from the Achill Archaeological Field School excavated the site in search of clues. The school's website claims that they found evidence of trauma leading up to the village's desertion, including the deliberate destruction of its stone and mud dwellings. All that's left of the homes are lumps in the ground and remains of the foundations. Evidence shows that the homes had thatched roofs and central hearths. Residents decorated with fine earthenware pottery, and some brought their cattle indoors for the winter, which was a customary practice in 19th century Ireland. The community was tight-knit and farmed the land together. Official documents show that a man named Charles Boycott acquired a lease for the land in 1855, but residents seem to have fled before he built a house overlooking the village, and their reasons for doing so remain a mystery. The abandonment seems to coincide with the onset of Ireland's Great Famine, but the timing doesn't explain why the site was demolished. Unfortunately, the village left behind no written records. The only documentation of it came from visitors, who viewed the population judgmentally and offered little quality insight into the villagers' day-to-day lives. Number 2. Indus Valley Civilization. Considered one of the ancient world's greatest societies, the Indus or Harappan civilization consisted of as many as 5 million people at its peak. The earliest settlements appeared in modern-day India and Pakistan as far back as 8,000 years ago, and the culture eventually spread to what is now Iraq and Afghanistan. By the 3rd millennium BC, the Indus civilization's population constituted as much as 10% of the world's population. Shockingly advanced for their time, They built sanitation systems that were so sophisticated, nothing comparable was seen again until Roman times. Harappan cities boasted grand walkways, metallurgy shops, and multi-story dwellings. The Indus people also developed a writing system that remains undeciphered to this day. The Indus civilization's glory days came to a screeching halt with its mysterious collapse around 1900 BC. Residents fled en masse for unclear reasons, and today's experts are still searching for the missing piece of the puzzle. Scholars originally blamed an Aryan invasion from the north, but recent research suggests that farming became impossible during an interruption of the monsoon cycle that lasted for 200 years. Disease and earthquakes probably didn't help either. Number 1. Firozka. Built during the 1100s, a tower called the Minaret of Jam sits in a remote and difficult-to-access part of western Afghanistan. Covered in ornate geometric designs and measuring 206 feet high, it's the ancient world's second tallest minaret. Today, the monument stands in a desolate region, but its presence suggests that it was once surrounded by a bustling city. Decades of foreign occupation has prevented scientists from exploring the site, which has seen significant looting. In fact, the area is home to an entire population of people who moved there to perform amateur excavations, according to a British writer who visited the site in 2002. They have removed marble and terracotta pieces, causing any story the artifacts may have stood to tell to be lost to history as the objects work their way through the illegal antiquities market. By the time archaeologists were finally dispatched to the site, all that was left besides the minaret itself were bone fragments, plant remains, and pottery shards. The experts concluded that the minaret belonged to the Ghurid Empire's summer capital, known as Firozka. Sheep, cattle, goat, deer, chicken, and gazelle bones bearing cut marks show that the residents ate meat at least somewhat regularly. Large stones found near the minaret contain Hebrew inscriptions, indicating a degree of religious tolerance in the predominantly Islamic city. The Ghurid Empire fell to the invading Mongols, who completely destroyed the city. It's unknown whether Firozka's residents were killed or fled. The only certainty is that they disappeared. Thanks for watching! If you'd like to learn about more civilizations that mysteriously collapsed, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!